Good afternoon. This is the Water Rates Committee for today, July the 16th. Thank you very much. At 1 o'clock. We're waiting for Director Peters to arrive, so she's running a little bit late. So we're going to put the meeting on hold for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So those of you online, please stand by and we will come back on. So we're just going to take a short break. Probably, I'm anticipating roughly 1:15. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Good afternoon to the Water Rates Committee meeting on July 16th, 2020. We're on Zoom, and some of us are here in the boardroom at NID, so thank you for coming back. I do want to acknowledge that I've heard a couple times now that some folks in the audience have a hard time hearing what it is we're saying, so maybe those of us who are speaking, when we do, we can try to talk into these little mics as much as possible. We're sharing one, you two.
Oh, as opposed to this?
Well, this projects to the room as well as to the recording, but those on the line have a hard time listening. They got to listen to that.
I was one of those that had a hard time hearing those.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the second Water Rates Committee meeting that we've had. I want to acknowledge the new committee membership with Director Bierwagen on the line here with a change from last Wednesday's board meeting. So just want to acknowledge that. We are here to talk about the 2020 cost of service study. We spoke about that last time. We kind of had an overview of that. Alex Handlers of Bartle Wells went over that, and we went through the process, the methodology. We went back to the board last week, so just as a recap, and we talked about some of the considerations and some of the issues that we projected we might face and wanted direction from the board. We got some direction as of Wednesday last week on really 4 areas as we look to develop and move into this discussion. One is, how are we allocating funding through the different district as a whole. The cost of service study came out with a zone by zones, and so we talked to the board about zones, number of allocations per customer, as well as maybe a hybrid approach of the two. So we got some direction there. We talked about fixed costs versus variable costs, so the base rate process, and so the board gave direction for the committee to start looking at increasing that and maybe levelizing that base rate and that variable rate cost on the rate structure. We talked about the hydroelectric transfer-ins and their in light of the FERC regulatory requirements that we anticipate over the next 40 years on a large scale work to be done with the hydroelectric department. We talked about how we can levelize, or at least find the appropriate level of support for rates coming from hydroelectric revenues while not dipping in again to hydroelectric reserves, which is what we did currently in the 2020 package. And then finally, we talked about identifying property tax as a way to pay down debt service, which, as we know, is a part of the rate structure for the water side of the house. I also want to acknowledge some of Director Peters' comments around kind of looking at a bigger picture component to the rate package in general, identifying some overarching goals, objectives, and sort of where we're going. Identified, I think you talked about the AWWA process somewhat, and how do we look at our rate package more from a larger picture, and perhaps identifying additional revenue options and sources that we may not be realizing at the moment. Given the timeline that we're under at the moment, we are anticipating the full budget for the board to come to the board in late October. Some of those conversations might need to be moved to another space. And so the purpose of today's meeting was to really start digging into the rates model. As you've seen before in the past, Marvin has created, Marvin Davis, finance manager, has created quite an exemplary Excel workbook, an Excel spreadsheet that can identify all of the assumptions that go into a rate package, including demand growth, including the rate. It's a 5-year projection. We talk about other inputs and other receipts. Unfortunately, Marvin is unable to be here today due to an emergency. And so we wanted to keep the day's conversation going today, though. It was kind of too late to amend and cancel, so we just wanted to bring us here today. We're not going to be looking at the model today. Number one, Chip and I and Doug don't know how to operate it, and so we'll wait till a future meeting, the next rates meeting that I believe is scheduled, and I can't remember off the top of my head when that is. The 28th of July. Okay, at 9 a.m. But with that, I wanted to just sort of kind of open it up to comments from the committee members, kind of what you've been, where any further thought process you've had on the package, any considerations we might want to bring back to the board, which will be next week, or wait. We do want to work on this model. This model really defines the overall structure need of the district financially, anyway, so I kind of wanted to open it up to the two of you.
Okay.
I have numerous questions, but Laura can go first.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah. And maybe I'll pick up some of my answers along the way.
Okay. Okay. As you know, I've had concerns. I don't want to just start this without looking at it holistically. I would like to, I'm not necessarily, it's true the AWDA is a national model that maybe doesn't all fit with our Prop 218. However, the methodology, I would like to take a more thoughtful, thorough look at the entire rate structure, and as not to reiterate, but that's what Greg just mentioned. And so, and in addition, as a representative of the community, I feel bad because in 2019, we said we would raise the rates 5.72% across the board. Can you hear me? Can people hear me?
You can go ahead and pull that closer if you'd like. There you go.
Thank you. And so we had said that we would raise rates 5.72% across the board for 3 years. And it seems a little disingenuous after 2 years saying, never mind, we're gonna jack it up next year anyway, instead of giving them the confidence that they could plan their resources. And so that's one thing. And then also with the economic situation, a lot of our ratepayers are out of work right now. There's, the economy is not, doing so great except for some sectors. So for all of these reasons, I just can't see the hot rush. I can't see why we have to meet and just cram something through that is kind of only not half thought of, but not looking at all of the whole picture. At the last rate meeting, Director Wilcox told me that the last structural change they did to the rate was in 2008, I think. I mean, it was a long time ago. And so I'd like to take a more thoughtful, methodical approach to how we're going to approach it. So I'd like to think that if we could, and then in the engineering committee last week, Doug Roderick, the engineering manager, had said there are some programs that are not need to have, but nice to have programs that we do for the community, and that if we could pause those for a year and just and stop and take this year to really look into the rates and do an internal savings belt tightening for this year while we really seriously look at the rates from top to bottom. And I discussed it with Greg Jones, the interim manager, and he seemed to think it may work. That may be a good idea. And so I'd like to, once again, pose that.
Okay, so my thoughts on the same, let's see, how we go, how we do this.
That's fine.
So I'm catching up here, but been here for the past cycle, so a little bit familiar with what's going on. I agree with Laura to a certain extent, but I got my own concerns about the heavy lift of this and our budget, and then when does and adding into that, when do we get our first bill for FERC relicensing? Okay, when is that likely to come on find its way into the budget? And I would right now say that might be 2021. Has the potential of being, and so that's a consideration. As far as, and I think overlaying that right now also is our discussions, because we're both on the Ag Policy Committee. I've had some questions from the community about what's happening with that. It seems to have disappeared. I said it hasn't disappeared. It's on hold. As we go down that path, because the rate structure is so needed on the raw water side, and it's quite contentious with that, or quite a challenge for that group of people that I'm feeling like we're between a rock and a hard place right now. And what do we do, right? Also, going back to what I was in favor of moving forward this year because of what happened in the past with we didn't, I was on that committee 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and looked at the models that said this probably needs to be 10%. I remember those numbers and going, and thinking, and 10% over 5 years or whatever it was proposed. And those days that we had that discussion going, I can see it in those numbers. What do we do about it? So I'm somewhat in favor of the idea of not rushing this through in order to try to get it right. But coupled with how are we going to, if we don't do that this year, if we just say we have a 5.72 for this coming year, then we have a challenge with the budget to get it in line. In light of the hydro subsidy limit that has been imposed or been suggested by the consultant.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that said, I didn't come with a plan today how to make that direction happen, but I'm glad that we're having this opportunity to do that.
Can I ask a question about the FERC
Yes.
liability? So if 2021 we do get it, and I understand that there's a rehearing at FERC for the 401, and so that's stalling it, so we're now on that FERC schedule. And so that's going to take a little longer. But don't we have like $29.5 million in reserves for the starting of that? And I'm talking about just 1 year of stopping some of these some of our programs. And
I know it doesn't all come, I mean, it's like,
right.
I don't remember the schedule, but it's like $2 million the first year or $3 million the first year, something like that.
So I don't think that, maybe I'm.
I don't recall the schedule off the top of my head either. There was roughly, I think, a $72 million investment in the first 5 to 7 years of the program.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what the first 2 or 3 were, but I think it was certainly in the $3 to $4 million to $5 million in the first maybe year, and then again in the second year. But you're right. There are we do have hydroelectric reserves in.
Designated for FERC. I mean, we don't have to budget the money to pay that FERC bill. That is my question.
Oh, we budget it.
Well, I mean, it'd be budget, but it doesn't have to come out of O&M to pay for it, right? If we have a reserve, right?
Yeah.
The way I understand
I
it.
think there's a way to process that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then
In the short term.
What's that?
Right, in the
In
short
the
term.
short term,
Yes.
yes. Okay, and that's also a challenge, you know, if there's $29 million designated for that, then we really don't have to worry about budgetary consideration going forward. Is my
I know-
no, we
confused about
do.
that?
Yeah, that's not quite right.
As far as budgeting the water, balancing the water, not balancing, but.
Yeah,
making the
I think if we learned anything from the recent board meeting where they talked about the cost of the FERC license implementation, it's that the district has to stop taking the excess funds from hydro to subsidize water. So I think one of our biggest goals in developing a rates package is to make us sustainable in water to the point where we can only rely on hydro for that benchmark 6 million, if that's what it ends up being, so that they can continue to fund their own projects in the future, not only the FERC relicensing, but many of the infrastructure costs that are coming down the road.
Well, and that segues, and I don't mean to not to sidetrack that one, but one of the things I've been arguing with folks about that hydro maintains and operates the upper division, and there's a number out there that I'm not familiar with, right? How many millions of dollars is that? When they say our water's supposed to be subsidized, I said, well, it is being subsidized. Not only does hydro take care of the upper division, they're also contributing to the operation maintenance, and so it's really a bigger number than I think our message is not getting out there for that one. The upper division part.
For that in particular, the hydroelectric budget roughly is a $13 to $14 million a year budget
Right.
for O&M in general. Then there's also another $4 to $5 million a year in capital improvement projects. So those are all done through everything above Rollins,
And Scott's Flat.
Scott's.
Yeah, yeah.
So yes,
So
those
every-
are.
Can you give me those numbers one
Those-
more time?
well,
O&M is what?
It's
Roughly,
about-
I mean, just ballpark.
I get in trouble.
Just
I want to say it's roughly $13 to $14 million
And I concur with
is a
that.
hydro budget.
Yes, right.
And I
Uh-huh.
believe that the hydro capital budget is roughly, Doug, is that roughly correct? The capital numbers?
Can I ask you about that? Because the hydro budget, the 13-14, isn't only for the waterways, the water delivery. It's for the hydro facilities
sure.
themselves.
All the power
But
plants, yes.
the power plants.
Yeah.
But that's not a water benefit. It's a benefit, but what I'm trying to say is, I looked at, and maybe this is wrong, but I looked at the upper division, the end of 2019 in the final warrants, the revision 2 warrants. It has some of all of the expenses for all of the facilities, and it says includes labor and non-labor, which I would say it would mean equipment and materials and consultants and contracts, and as well as internal labor for those. So I added up the upper division waterways and all of the Bowman Lake and Fauchier, all the lakes and all of the water facilities above the Rollins and Scotts Flat, and it was less than $500,000 for 2019. $500,000. Around that, and that was a little on the high side. And so I'm not seeing, because I know that hydro's powerhouses, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may be completely missing the mark here, because I was just trying to figure out same thing, what is that number? What is that subsidy that the water department is getting by getting the water delivered to our Rollins and Scotts? What are those costs? Is that,
Well,
is that?
I don't know if we know off the top of our head right now.
Right.
I think it's
But
probably
just the-
something that we can, part of this thorough look, as
Is
you
to look at
mentioned,
that. Exactly.
right? And seek to define some of that so that we can thoughtfully talk about it
Right.
and
Yeah.
factually discuss.
Right.
Because there are nuances amongst the whole district. We are a very complex organization, right? And there are inputs that and expenses that happen over here may not be a one-to-one relationship to an expense that happens, from over here. But there's certainly an interdependency amongst
Right.
all of our departments and all of our divisions. And so perhaps the education and taking the moment to really dig in and understand what that is a worthwhile activity of this committee.
Well, and my point on that is that because it's so on the side of raw water instead of treated water, our discussion, right? I don't know how the rates are for, well, this discussion is all around balancing out well, not all around, but it's definitely for the cost of service study shows that that's where the direction has to be focused, correct?
Right.
I
And-
think the cost of service study is really just a tool to provide the information on what the true cost of delivering the water to each customer base is really about. How the district determines to subsidize one group or another, I think is what this committee is here to discuss and help the board make that decision in
Well,
the
see,
future.
and part of that for me is still a confusion because of what I hear about the legalities in 218, what we can and can't do. It seems to be some wiggle room in there, but we don't know where those wiggle places are as far as subsidies go. I understand the basic one is that we can't charge any one group more than another group
Right.
the cost of service, above the cost of service. And so therefore, that's why I'm coming from the direction of saying, okay, the raw water has been and it's very historic, by the way, I get it, because I've just read the whole history again, how we got where we are today. And it is fascinating, but it's evolving, it's changing. It's really changing, and we have been interdependent with PG&E, and the whole reason all that water goes over to Spalding is so they all make power out of it first. It didn't make sense to me at first, and I go, I get it. So, that's another question I have of how do we get the facts about 218? Okay, because Laura's been talking about other districts having tiers. Okay, well, isn't a tier a form of charging one rate for one group, and we've sort of agreed we don't want to do zones, I think, up to this point, and I agree with that one.
Yeah.
I like the postage stamp.
I think along the way, we've had the conversation with legal counsel. That was the first meeting that we had a few weeks ago, right? And so there are certain guidelines and there are certain bookends that the 218 process keeps us in, and we can't stray outside of those. Some of the considerations are black and white. Some we're understanding perhaps are not so black and white, but we definitely need to keep within the parameters of the 218 process as any rate package is unfolded and brought forth.
So going forward with the ag water policy, and because we're both, this is now we're mixing them all together at the same time, but I don't think it's really a mixing. I think it's really the question for this year, or that we need to. So going forward with 218 and researching what we can do and can't do in the parameters of 218, and
I'm all for that.
I'm not clear on those today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we can do that. How much with that we can do.
Yeah. And to your earlier question of how can you establish tiers and still abide by the Prop 218 process, well, you need to prove that providing those extra volumes of water to those customers costs the district more, and therefore you're justified in charging more for extra water. Those are the kind of nuances of Prop 218 that we would have to work through. But stepping back for a minute and going back to what Laura brought up and her option of potentially rolling a 5.72 for one more year, as the board had established, as you remember, that 3-year window. If we go by that method, we will not have to do a Prop 218 this year.
Correct.
We would buy ourselves a little time. We could then more thoroughly study the finances moving forward and then do another Prop 218 process for 2022 and beyond. And
we could start that, because we're at beginning to, for this summer, we're looking at, when would that when would we enter into the 45-day process
So
and do all that?
I would recommend if we went that route, right, if there was that thought process, the rates committee continues.
It
The
has
rates
to
committee
it
doesn't
has to
stop.
Right.
Might not be every 2 weeks,
Right.
but every month. And let's dig into some of these activities and these thought process, and then we have a whole breadth of time to think about this. The cost of service study is just that. It's the cost to deliver the water. It's going to still be relevant,
Oh, yeah.
right? At the end, at this time next year.
Right. No, the percentages won't change much.
This time next year,
Right.
it's going to be
Right.
it's going to be relevant. We can still utilize it to develop the package with some more understanding in some of these questions that you've been asking for, to really help understand, and as well as educate the public and the community on the why, some of the history, the process
Right.
that we have to go through.
And the options that we have. I've heard that some neighboring districts, because treated water, this human right to water or whatever, we have to provide guaranteed water. The urban customers or the treated water customers, we are committed. We have to make sure that when they turn on their taps, they have treated water, clean, potable, drinking water. But and that's at the expense, if there's raw water customers and we have a drought or we have some interruption in our service, raw water gets cut off tomorrow. I mean, they're the first ones to be cut off. And there is a benefit to that. So to say that the raw water has to pay 100% of their freight when they don't have a guaranteed service, and treated water pays the same 100%, but we do have the guarantee. And in Prop 218, my understanding is that that's a valid
So
consideration.
that's the model that PCWA uses, right? So then do they charge a different, are they, under that logic, able to charge a different?
It's not one-to-one. It's not
It's
100% to
because
100%.
Because of the guaranteed.
Guarantee of
versus the
service.
non-guaranteed,
Mhm.
right.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep.
And there's a lot of things other people are doing up and down the mountain counties that have similar systems that I think it's worth our time to take a look and see what are our options? How can we structure it to best fit our situation? But we can't do it in 2 week, and then that's it. I mean,
We could not do that between now and the time that this,
would be needed.
if we went through a 218 process at the moment, we don't have time for that.
Right.
Well, and I'm also not in favor of creating a budget based on, that we will do that, right, in the spring, right? But if we delayed the 218 process this year, for this budget cycle, we have a new budget, we know we have to balance our budget with the 6 million, I call it a subsidy, it isn't quite the right word, but,
Transfer in. It's a transfer in.
Transfer in, I haven't learned to say that. And then, but keep this process going, and then in the spring or the summer, early in the spring or even in the winter, we go into, okay, what are the rates gonna be for 2022?
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think I'm in favor of that process at this point, because I've got too many questions, and, or a lot of questions that I've already asked, and going, coupled with all my friends in agriculture. It seems like I've heard from all of them this week, right? Because they know the process is going on.
Busy week.
And so, and we're committed to, we are, yeah, I tell them we are committed. I know the history. I've lived it all. I get it. There's the however. The time is marching on and evolution is happening, and there's a lot of factors. We're not gonna rubbing the crystal ball. The power generation is right now not looking to go in a skyward position, or direction, so I think it would be prudent to do that.
I also would like to say that I think that gives us a more solid number to develop a budget from in the
Yes,
coming
right.
weeks if we take that path. So I am appreciative of that. So being in limbo and developing a budget is not easy,
Is
and
not
we
good, no,
lived through it
no.
once before. So
And this way we could say, okay, here's the projected revenue, here's the transfer in, here's the rate increase, add that together, create a budget.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And I like that, that notion of, that direction.
there are some public with their hands raised when
Okay.
when we're ready for that. I would bring on this one piece of concern,
Okay?
and that is by not moving through a 218 process now, and seeking a different rate structure than what we have currently. We are not anticipating bringing the 13.5 million that we brought over from Hydro,
Right.
because we know now we can't bring that much over. Perhaps we can bring 6. That delta needs to be made up, and it's going to be made up through services that the district currently provides the community for a year period, and it's going to be a factor within our 2021 budgeting process. There's going to be some services and programs and projects that we just won't have the ability to complete, and that money's got to be made up somehow. So I just want to, I need to bring that up as the problem with that process. However, there's, if we look at a year delay in the rates and we review and we move forward, we're going to have to move forward on a rate package
Yes.
in 2021 anyway,
Yes.
irregardless, I think, of what happens this year.
Yeah, and if I can add to that a little bit, at the last board meeting, the board gave us authorization to start looking at utilizing tax revenue to offset costs for bonding and whatnot.
I don't know who gets credit for that, because that was already my idea to say, hey, we're not, this policy is not written in the book.
We'll give you can give credit.
No, it was still, as they go, there it is, right there, and they go.
So-
It's an option to use that.
So regardless, I think if
Yeah.
staff wants to, it would be wise for staff to go back with this option, look at all of those tools available in the toolbox, maybe come back to this committee at a point when Marvin is here, we can run those things through the model and see how it actually affects us, see where a 5.72, how it affects the bottom line, how it affects reserves, how it affects all of that. And then we can know in greater detail,
Right.
how doable this is. And I will add one last caveat for the holding off on the Prop 218. It costs a lot of money to do a Prop 218 notification.
Yeah.
So there's some cost savings in actually utilizing the 3-year window that the board has already authorized, so.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
I agree. Good point.
Good point, yeah.
Should we, is there sort of, I hear there's sort of some circling of hey, perhaps, and we'll hear from the public in just a second, but I'm hearing that there's some consideration to utilizing some of the tools that the board has authorized us to use, including property taxes, including the hydroelectric revenue streams,
Right.
including some other ways to close a gap. We have a meeting set for this committee in 2 weeks' time. 11 a.m.
11 a.m.
And we can, by then, we'll have the model back up. Staff can do, like Chip says, some modeling our own, and we can walk through the assumptions and the rates and see from a real financial standpoint what it is we're talking about. Can talk about some of the projects that we spoke a little bit about that on engineering committee the other day.
Right, and that's one that I'd be very fascinated, I've seen the list before, the engineering list of priority projects or the list, but don't have a clue about the status, the priority status, how urgent are they needed, that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, the backbone project like Wildwood, I'm totally in favor, I think it's a great thing. However, there's the however of if we have to if we have to hold back on those things this year to make this work this way, then, looking at all of them, not everything's on the table. And
I agree.
I'm not saying that one has to go or anything, I'm just saying that there's, you know, they're all, you know, I heard Chip say, did he say Band-Aid and baling wire in one meeting? Right, so-
Duct tape and baling
It's an
wire,
old-
yeah.
So what you're
So-
doing in your house?
Yeah. Yeah, I would think all non-essential projects, all nice-to-have projects, let's pause. I'm not saying stop them, let's just pause them for 1 year. And then if our engineers are sitting around twiddling their thumbs, they can help us do some of this deep dive on how these rate structures work.
Well, I
Multitask? You gotta ask Doug about that one.
I also think it's imperative for staff to really look at the budget and see what kind of R&R projects we really can't ignore.
Right,
Right?
and I-
What is
I'm-
of the highest priority?
Yep.
We need to continue to do those regardless
Right.
of how this rate
Absolutely.
discussion goes. We need to keep those in the budget.
And I
So
think
that's
that-
where the model comes into play as well, right?
Absolutely.
And then on the subject of restricted reserves that are designated, you know, they don't, those don't factor into the operation and maintenance budget, but they maybe go on, like Scotts Flat spillway and things like that, or things that we have to, you know, anyway,
Yep.
there's a lot to it,
There's a lot to it.
Yep.
so.
I'm 100% for that plan.
and
Okay.
I'm- And I'm mostly
Chris?
100% for that.
Okay,
plan.
okay. Well,
Yes.
and it all comes down to the details, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the
If it
devil's in the
pencils
details.
out, let's look at it.
And we're talking about it now from a theoretical component and a thought process as an idea. It's worth us taking a look and coming back to the next rates, and I think we've got, we still got the time to do that. And then we can see what it really
Well,
means.
In our last cycle, we did finish it in the spring from that, and I mean, we were a little lagging on getting the rate for that year, but
Sure.
it worked. I mean, I don't like the thought of that process, that timeline. I would rather have one ahead, but
Sure.
if we
Yeah.
felt we had to, then we could still do
Okay. Why don't we open it up to
Let's
public
do that. Yes.
questions?
First person who had their hand raised was Michael.
Michael, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon. A very interesting conversation. And Greg and I are on the same wavelength. Your study done by Bartles and Wells pointed out that funding in excess of the $6 million level from the hydro funds would require additional drawdowns on the reserves. And I think that's a very serious issue that I'd like to see you take a good, close look at. But I will look forward to next meeting where I assume you're going to specify which projects will be delayed by your not taking action of establishing new water rates at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct, Michael. We would have those identified and brought forth. I mean, that those need to be identified and talked about. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Can you get the last name for me?
Michael, was that Hillwell?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It didn't say. Thank you. And then we have Miller.
Scott and Chris Miller,
Is it our Scott?
your hand is raised?
Is Scott, Director Scott?
I don't know.
Yes, I'm a raw water user. I only get an inch of water. And I understand the fix of the variable rate, the cost of supplying water as opposed to the actual water coming down. But as people like me who just get a little bit of water get priced out, then we're gonna have to basically get off of the system, which is gonna raise the rates of all the agricultural users because they're not gonna have as many people to spread that fixed cost around. Has that been looked at?
I think you're referring to sort of a price elasticity component of the rate structure. Is that it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
That was a question I was gonna ask Chip today, but we didn't get around to it yet about the structuring the base rates. But we haven't got into the weeds on that one yet.
Yeah.
We haven't, no.
So the current rate structure, maybe Chip, you can give me the right number, the delta between the fixed cost and the variable cost on our current rate structure is, are we still at
We're somewhere in that, yeah,
35?
30% area. And it's been a much discussed item. And in fact, if you were a member of the last rates committee during this last meeting, we had some discussions about going to 50-50, especially on the treated water side. And our last rate study said that actually nearly 80% of our costs are fixed. Obviously, we can't charge that because we would run people out of town on water bills. So it's definitely the cost elasticity side of it on the ag side, I don't think has been studied very greatly. And I think that's another thing we need to look at moving forward, and buying us this time might help us with what those answers look like.
Yeah, when Director Beerwagen and I were meeting on the Ag Subcommittee, we came up with information that we thought we would need to make an informed decision, and one of them, who are the major classifications and major customers? How many 1-inch customers do we have versus 1.5, 2, 3, you know, and how much water are they using, and how, you know, and on both sides, because our rates aren't based on classifications of customers like residential, commercial, industrial, or true agriculture, large landscaping, that kind of thing. So that's a piece of information that we would need to inform the process.
Yeah, the most expensive drop of water is the first drop of water. That's for sure. I do recall last evening I spoke with the Nevada County Agriculture Commission, and I not speaking for Mr. Macon, but there was a perhaps comment that there was an opportunity to do some studies on price elasticity for the agricultural community, kind of where that breaking point might be. I see Chris on the line, and Josh. I don't know if you guys have any more insight into that. I don't want to speak for Dan Macon, but that there was a comment there last night that reflected, and it speaks to this price elasticity of not necessarily the base rate and the variable rate, but it does tie together.
Did that answer
Scott, did that
answer his
Mr.
question?
Miller, did that answer your question? Do you have any other?
Well, kind of, it really didn't address, I mean, because from the people I've been talking to, there's a lot of people who have been on the fence for a couple of years on just getting rid of NID because it's expensive. I mean, we get 6 months of water at, $100 a month, a little over that. And so, I mean, it's pretty expensive for 1 inch of water. And a lot of that water is only used for a few hours a day. And so, you know, it comes up with a thing of, if these people bail, what are you going to do? I mean, it's going to basically torpedo any budget that you have.
That certainly is a consideration.
That's a consideration.
Yes, and appreciate the comment.
Okay, thank you very much.
John Norton?
John Norton?
Yes, thank you. I want to encourage you to do the one more year at 5.72%. And I encourage you to continue these rate committee discussions and don't put it off until the last minute, because there's a lot of considerations here, especially it was mentioned by Director Beerwagen, is the need to carefully look at the impacts on agriculture, farming, and ranching, and try to determine those impacts at some different rate structures. And that goes with the Ag Policy Committee as well. This is going to take time, and I know we've got two good directors looking at that. So, and also hopefully you'll have two new good directors next year to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Any other comments from the public on this?
Chris?
Chris, go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris, Nevada County Ag Commissioner. First, I want to thank Greg for coming to our Ag Commission meeting last night. He did a very informative cost of service study, pretty enlightening. I'm pleased to hear that the community is considering maybe pushing out this process a little bit further. I have been in conversation with my counterpart there, Josh and Classer, as well as Dan, and we agree that there is a need to better understand that price elasticity. The simple reasoning that, ag right now is operating on very slim margins as it is, and they really can't pivot to a higher value commodity for many reasons. So, I urge you to seek input from industry professionals, educators, researchers, to find that price elasticity, because I think it's important for you guys to make your decisions.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Any other public comment on this today? Okay, we'll see none.
So what's moving forward? What's the,
We have marching
what's the
orders.
next steps? Yeah.
So marching orders, what we'll do is staff will go back to the model, and as we're developing already our 2021 budgets, we'll be looking at ways that there can be some use of property taxes to help pay down the debt service, and perhaps other ways to bridge the gap that a 5.27 rate structure going into 2021, and utilizing that as the rate structure in 2021, 1 year only. And we'll come back in 2 weeks' time on the 28th at 11 a.m. Right here, and we'll throw that model on the screen for the public to take a look at, and we'll look at the numbers and see kind of where we go, and we'll talk about some of the impacts of district budget and services, and that would kind of give this committee then assurances or concerns or what to then probably as soon as we can get back to the board with, if it's looking like that's the direction to go, then to the full board with a recommendation of the 5.72 for the remainder of 2021, while then the rates committee can slow its process down. It doesn't have to meet every couple weeks, but I would encourage the rates committee
think it'd be good.
to continue to meet on a monthly basis at minimum, have the consideration and conversations with the ag community, with the treated water community as necessary, right?
I would like to see us have a public meeting for the Ag Policy Committee.
Ag policy?
Separate, I mean, it doesn't have to be separate in my mind, but I think it would be helpful for those folks to feel like they're really at the table.
We certainly
If
can
we could do that.
bring those
Because I think
together.
we're ready at this point to have some input for
I think the earlier we start engaging, the better. So we're
Yes.
not waiting until this time next year to begin.
Right.
We need to take this year, these next
Absolutely.
12 months, and start that conversation. So when we reach this point next year, when we're thinking about 2022's budgets, we've got some certainty.
Right.
And we've got at least, close to certainty as we possibly can.
If I could ask a question and comment before we go off the line. A question for Chip about, so I'm definitely in favor of moving forward with base rates, changing the percentages. How are the base rates determined? I assume that they're not the same or are they? So mine is $500 and something, right? And then is the same amount applied to the 1-inch customer?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
are there tiers of those?
No. Base
No
rates
tiers.
are base rates
Base rates are
regardless
base-
of customer.
Okay, so that was a huge question I had going forward.
Yeah, the
about-
only variable costs are the amount you purchase. The base rate is
Yes.
the base rate for all,
Okay.
at least on the ag water side. The treated water side is exactly the same way.
So that's
same
an
base
equal,
rate.
difficult balancing act to move that one forward, because I see the
That was his
industry.
question,
What's
Mr.
that?
Miller's question specifically.
Yeah, that
Right.
was his question, and so that was my question. Are they tiered? Or, I buy 20 inches, I pay five, is he paying 500 for that one? And can we, and then this elasticity thing, that's a new term for me today. I'm not sure where the give and take is in that one.
It means how much can you pay before you
Stop.
determine that you're out of the market and you gotta
Oh,
stop?
okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the huge, community question or county question we have. I mean,
It's a big one.
I have plenty of opinions about ag and that stuff too. So, anyway, thank you for answering that. That helps a lot to going forward how we, because we hear that the around us, the base rate is higher, right? They're depending
Yes.
more on the base rate than they are
But keep in mind that those are, so as we further these discussions, and I'm looking forward to all this, we can treat the base rate differently, treated versus raw. And I don't know if you
that's
remember, during
another
the
question.
last
Yes,
discussion,
yes,
we
right.
actually were talking about increasing the base rate on the treated water customers, because during the last drought period, we lost a ton of revenue because
Right.
we were really volumetric
Right,
based.
right.
So moving that treated water base rate to be 50/50, 50% base rate, 50% volumetric, protects you a little bit in that regard.
Right.
But the ag side, we were not proposing any change at that point in time. So they don't have to go up the same
They don't
way.
have to, okay.
And that's all things that we can
I was
discuss in the
more
future.
curious. Yes, and I think there's a lot of
And that can be
discussion.
tied to the guarantee of service. I
Right.
mean, we have to provide the service
Right,
for treated water.
okay. Did we make progress?
I feel good.
I think so.
I do too.
Yep.
I feel very good.
Yep. So, I'm comfortable with where we're at and our marching orders, and so
Okay.
we'll come back in a couple weeks and have some numbers to look at.
Very good.
We'll make sure Marvin's here.
Very good.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all for participating. We'll close the meeting. Bye-bye.